Well, I want to thank you for providing me this opportunity to engage with you this evening. But I first want to congratulate Sophia Mathur on being recognized as this year's International Young Eco-Hero for her advocacy as a climate change activist. Well done, Sophia. I am not an environmental special scientist, and I acknowledge that I have much to learn from the very people who are on the Zoom call tonight. But that does not mean that I cannot be an effective and formidable agent. I will listen to the advice of climate change activists and scientists, and I will listen to the bold ideas of young people. And I will voice these clearly and loudly as your representative in Ottawa. Climate change is a great threat to humanity. And when I think about the pandemic and the very real threat to the human race that presented, and how all levels of governments, communities, specialists, workers, and everyday citizens all across the globe came together against the threat of COVID in such a short order of time, I can't help but wonder what we could accomplish if we turn that same sharp focus and energy to protecting our environment. Sudbury, for me, is the perfect example of what can happen when a community comes together around a common cause. We are globally recognized for our greening effort, and I have no doubt that Sudbury will continue to emerge as a world leader in environmental sustainability. Thank you.
Well, okay, thank you for those opening words. And so you've been provided with the three policy-related questions. So the first one pertains to C12, the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. And then we have a number of specific queries about that particular policy, which are on our next slide. So they are, whoops, we'll go back one. There we go. So in regard to C12, we want to defend how your party voted on that bill. How would you have voted? And thirdly, how you could have made the policy better if you could. Thank you.
So I will tell you that the Liberal government voted unanimously on all the bills. So I will give you that answer right off the top. In terms of Bill C12, that is our plan to achieve net zero emissions. It requires targets to be set and targets to be tracked every 5 years. And that is our built-in accountability for reaching that goal. And the way we are tangibly doing that is we put a price on polluting. It was a very tough but necessary decision that the Liberal government took. And we are glad we did, because had we not, we would have not been able to meet targets. We require half of new car sales to be zero emission by 2030 and all car sales to be zero emission by 2035. And we're making it easier to purchase zero emission vehicles with a $5,000 rebate. We're also providing rebates for homeowners to upgrade their homes to be more energy efficient. And we're phasing out fossil fuel subsidies by 2003. We recognize the harmful impacts, and we do have a plan to phase them out. We'll cap oil and gas emissions at current levels to ensure they decline from now on, with 5-year targets again to stay on track and to be net zero by 2050. And we're committed to achieving our 2030 climate target of reducing emissions by 40 to 45% at 2005 levels, which is in line with where science says we need to go. And we will reach net zero by 2050. Again, I will say that when the community comes together, amazing things happen. And I look at Sudbury and our regreening efforts as a perfect example of that.
Okay, thank you. So the next set of questions then relates to Bill C15. And so if you go to the next slide, we know that you stated previously that your party voted in favor of all three bills, so we don't have to cover that question. But if you don't mind addressing the other two questions about how you could perhaps improve the policy and how you personally would have voted. Thanks.
So the Liberal government, and certainly I, support the rights of Indigenous peoples, and the government passed the act earlier this year to ensure that these principles could indeed be implemented. The act requires the Government of Canada to work in consultation and in cooperation with Indigenous peoples to prepare an action plan, to tackle key themes such as addressing injustices, and to identify measures to align federal laws with the Act. Implementing the Act will be a key part of renewing the relationship between the Government of Canada and Indigenous peoples. I support this effort and the important work that needs to be done on reconciliation. The rights of Indigenous people include rights and titles to their land, and it is vital that this be respected. Self-determination should also be respected about what happens in their territories. I believe a whole of government approach to the Act is required. And in fact, I would like to see it included in every cabinet minister's mandate letter, not just the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, but every cabinet minister's mandate letter. The Liberal government is committed to conserving more lands and inland waters, and Indigenous-led conservation will play a central role in this effort. We need to respect and incorporate Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, very important. They have a deep knowledge and understanding of land management. They understand changes in the lands, waters, and ice in their territories. The Liberal government has committed $340 million in new funding to specifically support Indigenous leadership in nature conservation. And these funds will enable the expansion of the Indigenous Guardians programs, as well as set up additional Indigenous protected areas.
Okay, thanks. And so we will shift to our third examination of a policy question. This one is C230, the National Strategy to Redress Environmental Racism Act. And just like before, we've got the three guiding questions to help shape your responses to this, to our examination of C230. So I'll turn it over to you.
I'll start by saying that we introduced strengthened legislation to protect our environment through Bill C-28, Strengthening Environmental Protection for a Healthier Canada Act. And this action served to strengthen the original Canadian Environmental Protection Act. And this action was important for two reasons, well, for many reasons, but I'll highlight two reasons. One, the Act had been weakened considerably by the previous government. And second, the amended Act recognizes for the first time in federal law the right to a healthy environment, which is critical for environmental justice. So Bill C-230 would go even further to ensuring the right to a healthy environment by requiring the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change to examine the link between race, socioeconomic status, and exposure to environmental risk, and to develop a strategy to address environmental justice. I am in full support of C-230. It is important to ensure that no community gets left behind. Those communities can and should be part of the strategies to compensate for harm. Now, there are additional proposals for advancing environmental justice that I support, and they are to train workers so they have the skills to work in zero carbon industries, to protect workers by advancing Canada's first just transition legislation. This legislation would support economic diversification strategies at the local level. Just transition is an important matter for Sudbury and Northern Ontario. I can tell you that locally through FedNor and other programs, we invest in our local companies to take advantage of the demand for electrification of mining by helping to attract more skilled workers such as electrical engineers and technicians, and support companies and entrepreneurs in developing new electric equipment, processes, and engineering that support their local and export potential.
Thank you, Viviane. And so our fourth question then shifts to your particular climate policy. And then there's four questions that we drill down there. What climate policy would you continue to champion, improve, or create? What would be the impact of this policy, and which experts and what evidence supports it? And then finally, will it help to encourage our global neighbors to cut their emissions too?
So I think for me, part of my answer is actually reflected in the question itself, and that is we need to listen to the experts and work together. So my preferred policy is actually a principle. And it's a principle that we should apply to all policies moving forward. And that's, let's make sure that the communities and populations who are impacted have an opportunity to be involved in the development and implementation of solutions to climate change. It is so important to have that collaboration and that engagement. This is interconnected with our commitments to the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as environmental justice. I can tell you that I'm passionate about our commitment to facilitating a just and equitable transition to clean growth. I've said it before, I'm not a scientist, but if I'm elected, I will push our government to act on their warnings.
Thank you. All right, so the next two questions, again, as a reminder, are the audience submitted questions, and the first one references the red pine forest, the Wolf Lake old growth red pine forest, and also we can talk about the green space around Laurentian University. So the question is basically asking you what actions would you commit? One, would you commit to protecting those green spaces? And then secondly, what actions would you take to do so?
So the answer is yes. I would work ardently to protect these Wolf Lake as well, and old growth red pine forest and the university green space. And I think we can certainly, what I would want to do, because I just spoke about needing to work very closely with groups and with the experts, is we would need to work with the Wolf Lake Committee. I heard the Wolf Lake Committee members speak passionately at the Fridays for Future, Friday for Future, sorry, event last month. And I was completely motivated and inspired by their passion for that cause, and I would work very closely with that group. And the LU Green Space, I would work with the Coalition for Livable Sudbury and others championing to save the green space. But again, on Wolf Lake, I should say, and certainly an avenue I would take as an MP, is that the Liberals have committed to protecting at least 30% of land, freshwater, and ocean by 2030. And as your MP, I will strongly make the case that the old growth forest around Wolf Lake is a critical area for us to save. So the commitment is there in the Liberal platform. It is ensuring that Wolf Lake is part of that.
All right, well, thank you. So our second and final audience question, of course, pertains to small businesses and how they've been negatively impacted from the COVID-19 pandemic. And so the question here is, what would you do to help small businesses thrive in the low carbon economy?
So small businesses have shown how well they can adapt to changing environments, especially during COVID. COVID taught all of us, whether we're individuals, small businesses, large businesses, how resilient we can be. But like during COVID, small businesses will need support as we move to a low carbon economy. And as many economists have noted, the green economy will provide many new opportunities. And we're prepared to make very strategic investments in infrastructure, research, and development to create an environment where small businesses can become leaders in their sectors and hopefully become big business over time.
Sounds good. Thanks, Viviane. And so you actually have come in under time. So just to be absolutely fair with all three participants, if you want to take a few more minutes to highlight any particular message for our audience tonight, we can certainly afford you a few more minutes right now. Otherwise, the team, if there's any audience questions that you want to feed through to me that I can relay, you can put those in my private chat or text them. But yeah, so you have about 3 to 5 minutes if you wish to highlight anything else for the audience.
So for me, there are other important topics that we didn't have a chance to mention tonight, and I'm glad that we have time to do that now. And I think they deserve attention. And one is, I think we need to have plans for climate adaptation. and building a circular economy as well as a just transition for communities and individuals who would be impacted. So I also want to express some of my own personal thoughts and beliefs with you tonight, and that is, well, let me start by telling you what I believe climate change is and what it isn't. So first, climate change is real. And second, it is not a fringe issue. So, and that is because climate change and the environment relates to almost everything. Human health, economic growth, social and cultural inclusion, education, infrastructure, and physical capital. They are all related and impacted by climate change. And climate change affects everyone, everywhere. But it is immensely important for us to acknowledge that some people are more negatively impacted than others. And climate justice tells us that those who did the least to contribute to the problem are often hurt most. A disproportionate number of people who live in environmentally hazardous areas are Indigenous, lower income, or racialized communities. They are vulnerable communities. And as discussed earlier, I really like the idea of requiring the Minister of Environment and Climate Change to examine the link between race and socioeconomic status and exposure to environmental risk. And upon an examination, to develop a strategy to address environmental justice. We have a responsibility to address these issues and to provide opportunities for those whose voices aren't always heard to participate in finding solutions and working collaboratively. I'll step out of the environment mode for a moment and tell you that as Executive Director of Community Living Greater Sudbury, we provide supports to people who live with developmental disabilities. They are a vulnerable population and often need that voice and those advocates to speak on their behalf. And so that is something that I hold very close and that I am fiercely proud to champion at Community Living Greater Sudbury. And I will be fiercely proud to champion as your Member of Parliament for Sudbury. And environmental justice is also important, and we must acknowledge everyone's right to a healthy environment while acknowledging environmental racism. So thank you for your time tonight.